Good evening. Welcome to our first episode, our pilot episode, premiere episode of CIA Catholic Investigative Agency. And what we're going to be talking about tonight, I think, deserves a little bit of a preface. This topic, as a pilot for a show, saddens us deeply. We would much prefer to be doing a story that did not cover this particular topic, but this particular topic is timely. A lot of the facts here are disturbing. This is nasty business. And based on the emails we've received over the last few months, a lot of people want to know what's going on. And so we unfortunately have to do this as our first topic, but it needs to be done, so we're going to do it. Our topic is the various scandals going on at the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, in particular the Office of the Catholic Campaign for Human Development. So we're going to go into a little bit of history before we start here. First of all, the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops was only so named in 2001. What was the case originally is that it was formed in 1966 as two different groups, the National Conference of Catholic Bishops, NCCB, and the United States Catholic Conference. Both of these were formed in 1966. The NCCB was particularly the bishop's arm, and it took care of all work particular to things like sacraments and that sort of thing. The USCC, the United States Catholic Conference, was the lay-run organization that took care of things that lay people would be more appropriate for them to take care of, finances, that sort of thing. It was joined in 2001 and now operates with a staff of about roughly 300 or so people, almost all of them lay staff, and they operate on an annual budget of about $140 million a year. The $140 million a year comes from a variety of sources, but one of the sources it comes from is from assessments of individual dioceses all over the country. Based on a certain percentage, dioceses are required to pay a certain amount into the operating budget of this. Another bunch of money, about 50 to 60 million of those dollars, come from government grants, federal government grants, which of course, some people say ties the church a little too closely to the state, because all of a sudden now you're starting to receive state money, federal money, and that means, of course, there are federal requirements attached with that. Nonetheless, this is the operating picture we have of the USCCB so far. Now, in some of the prime players involved in this, Cardinal Dearden from Detroit started the NCCB in 1966. Cardinal Dearden also, in 1976, initiated the Call to Action group here in Detroit. Call to Action is a group that, since its inception, has been radically against a variety of church teachings. This group was brought together here in Detroit in 1976. About 3,000 people came together, mostly lay Catholics, to sort of come up with their own version of church. And they came out of this 4 or 5 day conference with recommendations for women priesthood, on and on. The same liberal stuff that's been floating around. It sort of got its hard, concretized form here in Detroit in 1976. Cardinal Bernardine was first Archbishop of Chicago, but prior to that, he was brought to the Conference of Catholic Bishops by Cardinal Dearden. He was brought there to be General Secretary, which is essentially the guy who kind of runs the show in the name of the chairman, which was Cardinal Dearden. Bernardine was brought there, as we said, in 1968. He came up with a novel theory of theological treatment of poverty and social justice and all of this, and it was called the seamless garment theory, or seamless garment theology. It said, in essence, that all of these different issues are all kind of the same, and we need to treat them all as one. And this is where this whole notion began, that poverty is just as important as abortion. And as we've progressed and seen through different elections and things here, this has become a major problem for Catholics when it comes to voting. Because some Catholics will say, wait a minute, war, that's a horrible thing. And of course war is a horrible thing. And somehow will relegate the direct life issues like embryonic stem cell research, abortion, these kinds of things just kind of get all lumped in together. So if you are sort of a more left-leaning person, you can say, well, wait a minute, seamless garment, it's all kind of the same thing. No, it's not. War is not an intrinsic evil, never has been considered by the Catholic Church. Abortion is an intrinsic evil. There is an absolute distinct difference between them in theology. Are they both bad? Yes. Is one always bad in every circumstance, no matter what the case is? Yes. Is one sometimes permissible under certain conditions and things? Yes. Abortion, the life issues, killing an innocent person, always takes precedence over some other right that someone may have. The seamless garment theory put all of this together, lumped it all together, and made it seem like everything is kind of the same thing. That was the brainchild of Cardinal Bernardin. Now, in 1985, then Cardinal Ratzinger was becoming concerned in his office as head of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, CDF. He was becoming concerned about a lot of the things that these different Episcopal conferences all over the world were coming out with, different documents and things like that. People were using these documents as excuses and their cover to go into parishes and start changing things around and saying, well, the Conference of Catholic Bishops says, and here's their document right here, it says this. So, in his book, the Ratzinger Report in 1985, the Cardinal wrote this on page 60. The documents of the Episcopal conferences have no weight of their own, save that of the consent to them by individual bishops. So, if any conference, in this particular case, we're talking about the American conference, but there's Germany and Australia and Italy, all countries have these. If a conference produced a document on whatever, that document does not become official church teaching. Never has, never will. If an individual bishop wishes to take that document and promulgate it in his diocese for whatever the cause or whatever the action is, he is free to do so because he is the bishop. It is not binding on all Catholics. It has no official weight in the church. Cardinal Ratzinger, in his position as head of the Congregation for the Doctrine of Faith, says that in his book, the Ratzinger Report. Now, we want to move on to some of the way the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops is structured. There are about 60 or so different departments and programs in this great big huge bureaucracy called the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops. About 60 of them. They run all sorts of various things from charitable operations to financial to investments to religious education to everything. It's a big huge monolith, and it's a bureaucracy, and fittingly it's headquartered in Washington, D.C., so that it could become involved in various lobbying efforts. Now, one of the departments there, and again, remember it operates on a $140 million budget a year. One of the departments there, of which there are many, is Justice, Peace, and Human Development. That is a big department there. That department has an office underneath it, that's underneath it, called the Catholic Campaign for Human Development, CCHD. It was originally called the Campaign for Human Development, CHD. They tacked the word Catholic onto the front of it after it kept getting attacked for being involved in all of these different kind of political, sort of appearing to be non-Catholic things. These charges that this office was a home for liberals and trying to push an ideological, sociological agenda that resembled something on socialism began almost from the beginning. They started near the beginning, and they quickly became the subject of articles in magazines like Crisis Magazine, the Catholic World Report, the newspaper, The Wanderer, started looking into these charges and saying, wait a second, why is this money going to that group? That's not what this thing's supposed to do. What's going on here? So these charges kept happening and kept getting printed about. Back in the day, back in the late 80s to early 90s, when these articles kept coming out, if you didn't subscribe to one of these magazines, you had no idea about any of this stuff. Most Catholics, much to the chagrin, I'm sure, of these publications, did not subscribe to these publications, and you sure as heck weren't going to be hearing this from the pulpit. There was no way for regular Catholics sitting in the pews to find this information out unless you subscribed to this. Now, there were enough people who subscribed to these things who would spread the news that some people knew about this. A very kind of isolated group of people knew that. This all changed when the internet came around and people started blogging and putting up, having websites like realcatholictv.com and American Life League and Bellarmine Veritas Ministries and Human Life International, and all these groups all of a sudden started going, hey, wait a minute. All of a sudden now, tons of people started finding out about these things. But that's jumping ahead of myself. William Simon, he was Nixon's Treasury Secretary. He was also an extraordinarily faithful Catholic. He was a Knight of Malta. He was a daily communicant, and he was very disturbed at what he knew was going on at the Campaign for Human Development. This was back in the 80s. He said in one famous quote that the Catholic Campaign for Human Development is a funding mechanism for radical left-wing political activism in the United States rather than for traditional types of charities. This was William Simon, the United States Treasurer. He was Republican. Most of the people he's dealing with are Democrat. Doesn't matter if somebody just makes an observation that's true, regardless of what their motivations may be. Is the observation true or is it not? That was the question. He gave the CCHD, the initials, he gave it the nickname the Catholic Campaign for Helping Democrats. In 1972, John Cardinal Kroll of Philadelphia put together a set of guidelines, how money was to be dispersed. Notice the year 1972, prior to Roe versus Wade. So the money starts going out and getting allocated. The CCHD office began in 1969, so this is just 3 years after its inception. He starts putting out all of this money, starts putting out all these guidelines saying this is the way the money should be allocated. In 1999, a new set of guidelines from the Catholic Campaign for Human Development came out. Now, this is a press release from the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops from April 7th, 1999, and part of it says, they express with greater specificity Catholic moral teaching with regard to the sanctity of human life at all stages, as well as the CCHD's commitment to uphold that teaching in all of its funding decisions. This is the bishop's own document. This is the bishop's own document that says the primary concern must be life matters. Life matters, and I've circled a section in red here. The revised guidelines do not differ in substance from the earlier ones produced by Cardinal Kroll, but they do offer the following. A new first point was added in order to clearly articulate Catholic moral teaching with regard to the sanctity of human life from conception to natural death, as well as CCHD's firm intention to uphold that teaching in all of its funding decisions. That's the very first point, and they rewrote the guidelines. Bear this in mind. This is the bishop's own document where they make this point. Now, why do they make this point? It's important to recognize that it's produced for two reasons. One, Roe versus Wade had come into effect by law, and two, by judicial fiat, and two, there had been a very large number of questions about where is that money going. That's what all of those different articles are constantly being published about, in-depth stories, where's this money going? Even then, there were questions. Back in the 70s, the 80s, there were questions, where is this money going? Why is this money going here? You read some of those articles, they're breathtaking in their scope about this problem. This problem has been present with the Catholic Campaign for Human Development from the beginning, from its very earliest days. It's now 40 plus years old, and it's still going on. Now, they produced this new set of guidelines because it's partially in answer to these charges. They rewrite the guidelines and make abortion, which was the major problem in 1999, they make abortion the primary case. No funds going to any group that violates Catholic Church teaching, especially with regard to abortion. No funds. Again, I will present to you their own words. Their own words. No funding, period. No funding. Bear this in mind. Now, as we advance, Joseph Cardinal Bernardine, as we said earlier, was brought to the NCCB by Cardinal Dearden. When he arrives there as the General Secretary in 1968, he is immediately introducing into the program, into all the different programs, his seamless garment stuff. He was involved in the setup of CCHD from the very beginning. In 1995, he gave a speech on the anniversary of the Catholic Campaign for Human Development. The name of his speech was The Story of the Campaign for Human Development, Theological and Historical Roots. This was given by him. He said in that speech, partially, as General Secretary of the National Conference of Catholic Bishops at the time, I was directly involved in this exciting endeavor. Oh, he was directly involved, all right. He was the seal of approval on everything the people at the conference set up that became the Catholic Campaign for Human Development. This is again Cardinal Bernardine of Chicago. Now, I'd like to introduce you to Saul Alinsky. This is his version, or his take on fighting poverty.
I think that somebody who goes off in a monastery and starts praying for the salvation of mankind and doesn't do a damn thing but sits there and prays, I think that when that guy comes up for judgment, that the judge is going to sit there and say, "Why, you cruddy bastard."
So now let's trace the history, shall we? Saul Alinsky, who we just saw our clip of him, was active with a group in Chicago, a juvenile delinquency group in Chicago back in the 30s. During that time, he came into contact with two Chicago area brothers, the Megan brothers, Joseph and Peter. Joseph Megan introduced him to many different Catholic priests in and around parishes in Chicago, some of Chicago's poorer neighborhoods. It's interesting because Saul Alinsky was a Jewish atheist, and he fell in very quickly with these fellows. Peter Megan, who was the brother of Joseph, was, as history would show us, was the conduit to the auxiliary bishop of Chicago, Bernard Scheel. Bishop Scheel and Peter, his secretary, Father Peter Megan, introduced Saul Alinsky to the inner workings of the Catholic Church in Chicago. The parishes, the different organizations, all of the different stuff that was prime during the beginning of World War II era in the church. Now, Saul Alinsky, had a group, had organized his first community organization coalition. It was called the Back of the Yards Council, and it was in reference to the backyards of the neighborhoods, these poorer neighborhoods, Polish, Italian, Lithuanian neighborhoods, where a lot of the meatpacking stuff was going on in Chicago. And he organized different groups there. What he needed, in particular, was backing from the church. So, this is what he says with regard to needing the church. To effect constructive changes in the life of the back of the yards neighborhood, this is his goal, these elemental social institutions are first, the Catholic Church, and secondly, organized labor. Saul Alinsky is the man who married church with the labor movement back in the 30s. And that's why you may say, gee, how come so many Catholic Union people they're like Democrats? We see all of this today in voting issues, don't we? This is where all of this comes from. This comes from an atheist Jewish guy who had a change society view and wanted to use the church to do it. And as a matter of fact, was very successful in using the church to do it. So, he schedules this, he asks Bishop Scheel if he, Bishop Scheel, will appear on stage with John Lewis. John L. Lewis, some of you here from Detroit may recognize that name. He was the top dog at the Congress of Industrial Organization, CIO. He eventually marries the American Federation of Labor Together and is the guy at the AFL-CIO. When Alinsky gets the bishop and John Lewis to appear on stage together at one of the rallies, that's it. He has the seal of approval of the Catholic Church on everything he's doing in Chicago. It's a brilliant move. Absolute brilliant move. So you kind of have to understand more, who is Saul Alinsky? What's his goal? Well, one of the things during his time in Chicago, he came across a young seminarian who was at Mundelein Seminary, whose name was Jack Egan. Jack Egan goes to seminary and becomes enraptured with Saul Alinsky. Saul Alinsky becomes a mentor to this young priest. This young priest, in turn, earns the nickname from the Chicago media of Saul Alinsky's priest intern. Whatever Alinsky is into, Egan is right there organizing this, pulling this together, getting everything to happen so that Alinsky's road may be clear throughout the church to do what he needs to do. Now, what does he want to do? In 1947, Saul Alinsky writes a book called Reveille for Radicals. which was republished in 1969, second edition. In this book, he lays out different things. He says organizing is a euphemism for revolution. His words. Saul Alinsky wanted to use the church to advance his socialist agenda. He says it in this book. Create a team of revolutionaries. Create professional radicals. Send them out into communities and make these communities turn and take the power away from the people who have it and give it to us who don't have it. That's his goal. That's his goal. By the time he writes this in 1947, he's already well invested into the Chicago Archdiocese with connections from the bishop's office, from Monsignor Jack Egan, from Joseph and Peter Magan. He writes another book in 1971 called Rules for Radicals. Now, he dies in 1972, but he writes this book in 1971. If you open up the dedication to this book and read it, it's dedicated, it says it right there. It says it right there in the dedication. It's dedicated to Lucifer. He says it. It's dedicated to Lucifer, the first rebel who through his actions inherited his own kingdom. His words. His words. So, this is the kind of guy that Saul Alinsky is. This man is no friend of the church. He's no friend of the church. He sees the church as a vehicle that if he can marry different forces together, as he already said in his quote there, the church and labor, if he can marry these forces together and get into the neighborhoods and start pushing a political agenda, he can get what he wants. And he does. To a very large degree, he starts to get what he wants. Monsignor Jack Egan teams up with him, starts doing all of this stuff, promoting him. Saul Alinsky gets so well known in the Diocese of Chicago, Archdiocese of Chicago, that his notoriety keeps going, that if Saul Alinsky shows up at something, particularly a church event, it's a big deal. It's bigger than the bishop showing up. Saul Alinsky is the guy. And he stays this way for the 40s, into the 50s, into the 60s, developing a network throughout the country through these priests, these different priests and their priest connections and so on and so forth. He develops a network throughout the country. In 1968, the new cardinal of Chicago, Cardinal Cody, sees what Monsignor Jack Egan is doing with his office inside the chancery. His office, I believe, is called Urban Development. I might have the title wrong, but whatever. It was a community organizing group. Cody doesn't like this at all. Cody says, no. Monsignor Jack, close down your office. We're done with that. That's not what the church is about. That's not what the priesthood is about. Forget it. The Chicago media described it as him getting called on the carpet. So the office goes away. Of course, he's deflated. Saul Alinsky is 61 years old at this time, and he's thinking, what am I going to do? Well, have no fear. All of a sudden, he gets a phone call from Father Ted Hesburgh at Notre Dame, who says, hey, Jack, why don't you come on down to South Bend? It's only an hour away. We'll set you up here. You can have a sabbatical. Now, I don't know how you count a sabbatical, but for the most part, I've understood a sabbatical to be 1 semester, maybe 2. Jack Egan camps out at Notre Dame for the next 14 years. For the next 14 years, he stays at Notre Dame under the protection of Father Hesburgh. Father Hesburgh allows him to start putting together a priest's network throughout the country, bringing them there for conferences, and all of a sudden, now you're in the national bloodstream because you're at Notre Dame, the iconic sort of Catholic thing, under the leadership of Father Ted Hesburgh, who is nobody's conservative. So he develops this network. All of a sudden, in the late 60s, the race riots are going on in different urban areas around the country. A document is published called the Black Manifesto, and in this document there is a call for reparation to African Americans, anybody who's a descendant of slaves, for all of the horrible stuff going on, that all of these riots and everything are going on as a result of all this prejudice and the historical stuff and all of that. And they ask for reparation from a number of groups, including the churches. So the Protestant churches kick in about $1.5 million into this kind of reparation fund that gets developed. The Catholic response is, we're not really exactly quite sure what to do here, so why don't we start looking to do this? Who has a lot of experience in these sorts of things? Jack Egan and his little network of priests, half of which left the priesthood, by the way, before they died. So he develops this little network. All of these priests, with the exception of one, are personally trained by Saul Alinsky in those tactics that he lays out in his book, Reveille for Radicals. Personally trained. This cadre of priests are brought to the USCCB, or National Conference of Catholic Bishops at the time, the NCCB headquarters, and said, you guys are charged with coming up with some kind of plan for us to be able to answer this black manifesto and see what we can do with money to help alleviate poverty and these sorts of things. What can we do? They sit down, and in the space of a few months, they come up with an entire plan. This plan is then presented to the bishops. The bishops vote on it. This is the resolution the bishops voted on in 1969, their summer meeting of 1969. Therefore, be it resolved that the National Conference of Catholic Bishops establish a national crusade against poverty. That was the name of it. Some of you may remember that. The National Crusade Against Poverty. This is 1969. The crusade will commit the church to raise a fund of $50 million over the next several years. Those 2 points are important. $50 million over the next several years for the national campaign crusade against poverty. The collection is taken up the following Thanksgiving. The Sunday before Thanksgiving is designated as the day for the collection to be taken up. And that first collection raises north of $8 million. It's taken up in every parish in the country, just about every parish in the country. That was the most money collected in the history of the church at that point. In real dollar terms, $8 million today would be something of the equivalent of $25 million. So we're not talking loose change here. This becomes an enormous amount of money. Now remember what the charge is, $50 million over the next several years to go into this campaign. This campaign, this national crusade, has a sort of stop point. $50 million, once it's reached $50 million over the next several years, then the campaign has done what it was supposed to have done. The crusade has done what it was supposed to have done. As we move through and look at this now, 40 years later, this campaign is still going on, and it has collected north of $280 million. $280 million in 40 years. What was its original commission? $50 million over several years. Why is this campaign still going on? It by far exceeded its goal in the first few years. They made good projections, $50 million in several years. They got 8 the first, so 5, 6, 7 years, they'd get their money and that should be it. No, the campaign keeps going on. And there's no end in sight. There's no plans to cancel this or anything else. So, what happens now is you start to say, well, where has this money gone historically? It's gone to a number of different groups. We've identified a few of them here because these are kind of bigger name groups. The first one is IAF, the Industrial Areas Foundation. This was personally founded by Saul Alinsky in 1941. That is his group. It is no one else's group. It's now run by an ex-seminarian. He founded this, as he said in its founding documents, a school for professional radicals. That's what he says. That's what this operation is, a school for professional radicals. Every year, 16% of every dime that's collected goes to that operation from the CCHD under the title of Fighting Poverty. 16% goes to that one organization. What's another one that gets it? Midwest Academy, started by a woman whose name was Heather Booth in 1973. Heather Booth graduated from this academy. She's the one who started this. She was one of the professional radicals. She went out and started Midwest Academy along with a couple other groups. Every one of these is a community organizing group, every last one of them. Where what's the point? Is the point to, as William Simon said, take care of poverty in the traditional manner, or is it to sort of grab power from people and rearrange the social structure? It's the latter. Alinsky makes this very clear in all of his writings. Nobody questions what Alinsky was about. Her husband, Paul Booth, was a leader of the Students for Democratic Society and now is an advisor to the president of the Ask Me Union. Notice the connections here as we develop the story. It's union, democratic money, radical associations, etc. PICO is an organization, People Improving Communities Through Organizing. They don't even hide these things in their names. You could at least use P and make the word poverty. This was founded by a Jesuit priest in 1972, Father Baumann, another disciple of Saul Alinsky. Another group that gets money is DART, Direct Action Research Through Training. This was founded in 1982. Again, another spin-off from IAF. All of these groups are run by Saul Alinsky disciples. Another one, Gamaliel, was founded by another Jesuit priest in 1968, Gregory Galuzzo. Now, those are not by any means all of the groups that get money. Those are 5 very kind of notable groups. During his campaign speeches in 2007 and 2008, you will recall that the word community organizing or community organizer sort of first burst upon the mass Americans. He was like, community organizer? What's a community organizer do? Jay Leno had some great jokes about what's a community organizer do. This whole concept has kind of flown under the radar for decades until all of a sudden a man emerges who says, hey, vote me in for president, I was a community organizer. All right, well, when you look back at what happened, the history of how this stuff developed, here's a man who grew up as a community organizer in a system designed to say, we are going to take power from you and we're going to give it to us. That's the whole point of community organizing. And somehow the people who are getting power will then no longer be hungry. Not quite sure where the poverty aspect comes in here, and we'll talk about poverty before the show is over. So when you look back at all of the associations, and then you look back and say that this whole movement really kind of went into phase 2 and got its start, its kind of jump start, when Egan goes to Notre Dame under the protection of Father Hesburgh. All of a sudden, Obama at Notre Dame last year at the graduation all of a sudden appears to be something much more than just the President of the United States giving a commencement address to students going, rah, rah, go out and save the world and stuff. That was a victory lap for the entire Saul Alinsky school of community organizing. They wanted to have that. People at Notre Dame have told me personally that the priests in charge at Notre Dame and many of the people on the board of fellows, the 16 people who run Notre Dame, even above the board of trustees, wanted Obama there before Father Hesburgh died to show him that his dream and everything he had done had come to fruition. This was a payback and it was a victory lap for this entire thing. Who was the bishop that protected all of this on an official level? Cardinal Bernardine. If you paid attention, now I sat there watching that. I went to Notre Dame, as many of you know. I sat there watching that saying, why would he, Obama, be talking about Bernardine? That was, I'm like, what? I mean, okay, so he's in Chicago. So what? Listen to what he says about that.
I found myself drawn not just to the work with the church, I was drawn to be in the church. It was through this service that I was brought to Christ. And at the time, Cardinal Joseph Bernardine was the Archbishop of Chicago. And for those of you too young to have known him or known of him, he was a kind and good and wise man, a saintly man. I can still remember him speaking at one of the first organizing meetings I attended on the South Side. He stood as both a lighthouse and a crossroads, unafraid to speak his mind on moral issues ranging from poverty and AIDS and abortion to the death penalty and nuclear war.
He conflates these issues, or Cardinal Bernardine conflates these issues as though they're all the same, poverty, AIDS, and abortion, as though they all have the same moral footing. They do not have the same moral footing in the church. Why is the President of the United States standing there praising this man? Because it isn't about those issues. It's about this community organizing business that's going on that got him elected. He went back and took a victory lap and tipped his hat to the dead cardinal whose protection for all of this stuff and all of this different political operation going on the ground is what got him elected. Now, we're going to talk specifically about how offensive this is as soon as we come back. We'll be right back right after this. Welcome back to CIA. We are exposing a lot of the scandal that's going on at the Catholic Campaign for Human Development Office and the historical roots for it. In January and February of 2010, a couple months ago, the Reformed CCHD Now Coalition started doing a lot of digging into what is currently the case going on at the CCHD. A few reports began to surface that some groups that were getting funded were pro-abortion and pro-same-sex marriage, marriage in quotes. I will reference you once again back to the bishop's own document from 1999. We are to clearly articulate Catholic moral teaching with regard to the sanctity of human life from conception to natural death, as well as the CCHD's firm intention to uphold that teaching in all of its funding decisions. They wrote this, we're going to hold them to it. This is their own directive. Now, there is a group called the Center for Community Change. Center for Community Change is an umbrella organization of about 300 groups. It is a community organizing group, the CCC, Center for Community Change. Underneath it are about 300 different groups that receive money from all sorts of places. Many of those groups, 31 of them, receive funds from the CCHD. Money you throw into the collection plate channels its way through grants, through a grant-making application to this organization and groups underneath it. All right, we have 15 groups here, for example. Some of them are members of the Center for Community Change, the CCC, but they're all problematic in the fact that they are directly involved in promoting abortion, same-sex marriage, etc. The Little Village Environmental Justice Organization. I'm going to give you some lessons in code words here. If you ever see the term environmental justice, there's no such thing. That's code language for population control, global warming, climate change, and all of the stuff that goes along with that. You see the term environmental justice? Don't be fooled by the word justice. There are people who are taking these words and misusing them on purpose to dress them up in theological sounding terms that simply aren't, they have no basis in theology. The Rebecca Project, for example, is pro-abortion. The Women's Community Revitalization Project, pro-abortion. The Community Organizing and Family Issues contributed to Obama's campaign, which is problematic in itself. In addition to this, it received contribution from Playboy, as well as the Catholic Campaign for Human Development. The Massachusetts Community Labor United, Intercommunity Justice and Peace Center, LA Community Action Network, LACAN. That group, coalition, asked the Bishops' Conference to defund that group, and they said, no, that group is pro-abortion and pro-same-sex marriage. It has in its printed materials support for a clinic promoting contraception, and it boasts about its work against Proposition 8 in a couple of its newsletters. This is nobody having to go do this hunting and slip people money and talk to Deep Throat out in the parking garage. It's right on their website. It's on the website. Welcome to 2010. Nothing's hidden anymore. Young Workers United, Preble Street, Voces de la Frontera, hope I didn't mess that up, Chicago Workers Collaborative, Southwest Organizing Project. All of these groups have some connection. They fund groups, they fund money, they shuffle money, they're allied with other groups that are all opposed to Catholic Church teaching. Every one of these groups. The San Francisco Organizing Project. That was asked again, please defund that group. They've supported voter initiatives and voter drives to advance health care legislation in the areas of reproductive rights, which we all know is code language for abortion. Provide it, make sure it's in health insurance coverage. This group gets Catholic money through the Catholic Campaign for Human Development. Even after requests and pointing it out and saying, here, change this, nothing's happened. They're still getting money. People Organized for West Side Renewal, the Chinese Progressive Association. Now, the Chinese Progressive Association did get defunded in, I believe it was November or October of last year, after some of these reports came to light. They had actually produced a concrete voter's guide, the hard thing, and it said right there, we support, blah, blah, blah. It was almost impossible not to defund them because it was right there. So the head bishop of the Catholic Campaign for Human Development, Bishop Morin, did defund them. But here's all these other groups. What about all these other groups? They're all doing the same thing. It's all on their website. They either participate in all of these things directly, or they are in league with other groups that do so directly themselves. Now, to the charge that, oh, well, this is just guilt by association. This is Catholic money. And yes, there is sort of a principle in Catholic teaching, is there not, in Catholic moral life, that you avoid the dangerous occasion? You always err on the side of being right. You don't just plunge in and say, well, I'm going to do whatever I want to do, and if something bad happens, oops, it'll happen. No. But that's precisely the mentality with funding these groups. These groups push a political agenda that has, in the last 15 or 20 years, has greatly wrapped its arm around the entire pro-abortion, pro-same-sex marriage movement, the contraceptive movement, the environmental movement, all of it. They're all involved in this. This entire network was set up for this purpose, to destabilize the political power as it was and turn power over to the people. We all know what people power turns out to be eventually. Look at your history books. So, the Center for Community Change in 2001 got handed $150,000 of Catholic Campaign for Human Development money. Just handed them. One-time grant, $150,000. When it comes to this sort of business, you know what a grant is? A grant's free money, no strings attached. Fill out an application, boom, there you go. $150,000. I'm going to imagine that there are a lot of pro-life pregnancy centers around the country that could have used that money. I'm going to imagine there are a lot of soup kitchen type things around the country in different parishes and different small little groups that could have used that money. $150,000, because the people connected to that group are also connected to the Catholic Campaign for Human Development. 31 other groups under this umbrella also get money from the Catholic Campaign for Human Development. Now, a very interesting thing happened when this story came out in the beginning of February. We did a story and located on the bishop's webpage a direct reference saying, support the Center for Community Change. Support that group. It was written right there. 6 hours after we did that story, it was gone from the bishop's page. This is not being disobedient to bishops. This is not making some challenge to the faith. This is calling out and saying, you have taken hundreds of millions of dollars from the faithful, and we want to know where that money is. The next group, the Leadership Conference for Civil Rights. Now, you'll notice as you start to go through, and I hope many of you who are watching this show at home or any of you here will now pick up the ball and start investigating these things on your own. And go to your bishop. Go to anybody, tell everybody you know, hey, I went looking. Guess what I found? You know what? We're not brilliant here. We sat down, we took some time, we got on the computer, all of this stuff is available. All of it's available online. Sit and start doing research. Another group you could research, and you'll notice as you research that a lot of these groups constantly are sort of changing their names around. They change their website pages, they change their names. This LCCR, the Leadership Conference, is what it's called now. That's the third title it's had in as many years. It was first the Leadership Conference for Civil Rights. Then they stuck in the phrase "and human." So it became the LCCHR. And they got rid of that a month ago, and now it's the Leadership Conference. But it's civilrights.org. That's their website. Go on there, just for fun, go onto their website. Go on to the Center for Community Change. Peruse around those websites. Now, you have to dig deep. You're not going to turn it on. They're going to say, hi, we support abortion. But look at who they're allied with. Click into some of those programs. When you go into the Center for Community Change, you go into their program, and all of a sudden, you'll see something that has this kind of boring, innocuous title like Generation or Vision Lab. Or you're like, well, what's that? That sounds kind of boring, and you skip right over it. Until you find out that it recruits college students who are either homosexual themselves or are in league or in favor of that kind of lifestyle, and they gather them together and they put them through training classes to send them back out into colleges to promote it. But you wouldn't know that from the title. It doesn't say like homosexuals or us. It's not the name of the program. But it does. That's the whole point of these things. So they all have these innocuous titles. Center for Community Change. You wouldn't have the slightest idea what that meant if you didn't have some sort of background knowledge. The Leadership Conference for Civil Rights. Well, who's against civil rights? That's ridiculous. They all have these innocuous titles. And the programs under these different conferences and groups all have these innocuous sounding titles. That's the problem. Until you dig down and you start reading, who did they give an award to? Let me read one of the speeches of one of their boards of directors when he gave it at Planned Parenthood. What's he giving a speech at Planned Parenthood for? You got to dig down about 4 or 5 levels, and all of a sudden it starts becoming very clear. And all of a sudden you start recognizing the name on this board of directors also happens to be sitting on that board of directors. Oh, and this guy happens to be married to her, and you start seeing this entire network going on. And it is a closed network that, believe me, has an awful lot of power. An awful lot of power. If you click through the Leadership Conference for Civil and Human Rights, or the Leadership Conference, or whatever they call themselves this week, you will notice that they're in favor of same-sex marriage, and I put it in quotes. Do they get money from the conference of the Catholic Campaign for Human Development? Yes. Yes, they get a lot of money. Those groups that we had up here, those 15 groups, since 2004, those 15 groups have received $1.5 million of your money. Of your money. $1.5 million. On the board of the CCC is a woman by the name of Heather Booth. Do you recognize her? Midwest Academy. She's on the board of CCC. It's a prime example of it right there. There's another fellow who's on the board for the Center for Community Change. We're going to get to him in a second here, but the connections between all of these groups, different board members sharing different seats, and they work for this organization, but they're on the board of that one, and they're all tied in. And all these guys know where the ATM machine is, and the ATM machine is the Catholic Campaign for Human Development, and they all know it. It doles out somewhere in the neighborhood of $8 to $9 million a year to all of these community organizing groups. Big ATM machine. Don't tell me that the pro-life movement and the Catholic Church couldn't use that money. The pro-life movement. The bishop's directive. A new first point was added in order to clearly articulate Catholic moral teaching with regard to the sanctity of human life from conception to natural death, as well as the CCHD's firm intention to uphold that teaching in all of its funding decisions. They are not upholding that teaching in all of their funding decisions at all. They couldn't be further off base with it. They might as well just take it and write a check to Planned Parenthood. This is disgusting. Now, there's another group that we're all somewhat familiar with, ACORN. ACORN has a long history. Over the course of 14 years, until 2008, ACORN received almost $8 million from the Catholic Campaign for Human Development. $8 million. Now, you start to think of these numbers that we're tossing out up here, $1.5 million here, $2 million there, $500,000 here, $150,000 there, $8 million here. You know, after a while, this adds up to be real money. This is tens of millions of dollars. In fact, over the 40 years, it's hundreds of millions of dollars have gone to these Saul Alinsky groups. Now, you want payback when you give money. You want payback. The bishops stopped funding ACORN not because of its association with all of these groups and all of that news that came out on Fox that people could go in there and get grants and get government help to open up houses of prostitution with illegal underage girls. That was the ploy, and there it was, all over, made national news. That's not why they ended the funding. They ended the funding because the 2 brothers who started ACORN, one of them got accused of embezzling somewhere around $8-9 million, and all of a sudden when that hit the news, and it hit the news that the bishops give money, the bishops' conference, more specifically the Catholic Campaign for Human Development, gives money to that group, it was like, oh, no, we're stopping that. So they put him on suspension for 4 months, and then at the end of that suspension, they said, nope, no more money, that's it, you're cut off permanently. And on the website, you will see on the bishop's website, the bishop's conference website, you'll see a bit of a boast that says, we were the first group to defund Acorn. Well, you'd already given them $7, $8, $9 million. I mean, what do you want, a cherry with some icing or something? Moving on from Acorn. One thing we have not touched on deeply is that all of these community organizing groups have various ties to the Democratic Party, because most of these goals are shared by much of the Democratic Party. Not all of them, but certainly many of them. We'll go through a few here. First fellow is Tom Chaboya. Tom Chaboya was with the CCHD as its director. He was the director in 2008 as these funds were being given out. Now, he certainly wasn't the only director, but he was one of them. He was continuing to give this money out. Tom Chaboya sat on the board of the Center for Community Change at the same time. I don't know anywhere in corporate America that sort of mixing would be allowed. He went from the Center for Community Change and CCHD to the Obama campaign and worked on the Obama campaign. When he was done with the Obama campaign, after they were all happy and gleeful that their guy had gotten elected, he moved on to the SEIU, Service Employees International Union. This union gave $60 million to the Obama campaign. $60 million to the Obama campaign. The man heading it up, his name is Andy Stern. Andrew Stern is the most frequent guest at the White House. His name appears on the guest rolls more than any other person. You get $60 million, I guess you get to sleep at the White House a lot. His assistant is Tom Chaboya. Mary Kay Henry. Mary Kay Henry is a health care advisor to the bishops on one of their subcommittees. She was. She's not any longer, but she was. Now, it's a little difficult to find that information on the bishop's page. However, if you go to her bio on her employer's webpage, which is the Service Employees International Union, where she is the president for international affairs, you will find it laid out there quite nicely in the last two paragraphs, that she is an advisor, consultant to the bishop on healthcare advisory matters. You will also find on there that she is an open lesbian in a 20-year relationship. She has been instrumental in pushing the entire gay agenda at the SEIU and takes credit for it and puts it there proudly on her homepage. This is a woman who the Bishops' Conference feels as though they need to turn to for advice on matters of health care. Next, a consultant in matters of health care, John Sweeney. John Sweeney just retired in September as president of the AFL-CIO. The AFL-CIO has been backing the healthcare initiatives, and all of a sudden when things got dodgy, if you remember this a couple of months ago, all of a sudden there was an exception that union workers weren't going to have to be covered by the same rules as everybody else. The Bishops' Conference backed the healthcare plan. Some people have taken some of the documents from church teaching and said that, and the first person to say this was Cardinal Bernardine, that it is church teaching that healthcare is a right. Despite the push from the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops for healthcare reform, among many groups, nowhere in Catholic teaching does it state that the government is responsible for providing healthcare. That is not an article of Catholic faith. If I have a right to something, then somebody has an obligation to give me that right. This is not a matter of dogmatic Catholic Church teaching, but it is trumpeted that way, and everybody says, well, Let me ask you a simple question. If health care is a right, well, shouldn't food be a right? How about water? How about a house? Shouldn't these be rights also? I mean, not everybody's sick every day, but everybody's certainly hungry every day. Shouldn't these be rights? No. This whole question of taking certain lines and certain phrases from papal speeches and papal encyclicals and apostolic exhortations and crafting a theology around them and then calling that theology social justice and peace and all of this and standing under that banner and pretending that you represent Catholic Church teaching while you are taking hundreds of millions of dollars under that banner and siphoning it off to groups and and supporters of one particular political party is not Catholic teaching. Never has been, never will be. Another fellow is John Carr. In his official capacity, John Carr is higher up the food chain, and his department oversees the Catholic Campaign for Human Development. John Carr came out of the Carter White House and moved right into this job. Now, we're going to talk about Ralph McLeod. Ralph McLeod is currently the head of the CCHD. He's the executive director of the CCHD. He has something of a speckled past when it comes to politics. When Obama was elected, the head of the Catholic Campaign for Human Development went to the Center for Community Change and gave a speech. And in that speech, he celebrated the election of Obama and said that this is the beginning of a new Jerusalem from the Catholic Campaign for Human Development. During all of this time, all of these tie-ins to the Democrats, to the Democratic Party and many of their allies, all of this money has been going to these different outfits, community organizing outfits. That's the reason the money goes to them, because they are community organizing outfits. As all of this information started to break, a few bishops around the country said, I don't like this. I don't like this at all. Those bishops, first one, Bishop Edward Slattery from Tulsa, Oklahoma, withheld the collection last year. John Bars from Allentown, Pennsylvania, Bishop Robert Merlino from Madison, Wisconsin, Bishop Robert Baker from Birmingham, Alabama, Bishop Fabian Bruskowitz from Lincoln, Nebraska, Bishop Victor Gallione from St. Augustine, Florida, and lastly, Bishop David Ricken from Green Bay, Wisconsin. Now, Bishop David Ricken I'd like to talk about for a second in Green Bay. The collection is generally taken up that Sunday before Thanksgiving. There are a few dioceses around the country that withhold taking up the collection until the third or fourth Sunday in Lent. Green Bay is one such diocese. When Green Bay was scheduled to take up the collection, and earlier this week, the end of last week, Bishop Ricken issued a statement saying, so many of these things have come up that are so troublesome that I have decided to suspend the collection, the CCHD collection in the diocese this year. Now this gives us an opportunity to explain some things also. When the money gets collected, whatever it is for a diocese, let's just make up a number and say it's $1 million. If a diocese collects $1 million in the CCHD collection, that diocese keeps 25% of that money and sends 75% of it on to the Catholic Campaign for Human Development that then fulfills these grants to all of these organizations. The money kept locally, the 25%, is spent on different projects that the bishop or his staff or whoever have identified locally that they want to do. That's the way the system works. So I just want to make something clear, because CCHD collection money is being spent on something local does not mean that that local operation that the bishop and his staff and his people have identified is a bad operation. That's not what that means. When the local bishop is doling out the money through his staff, that's an entirely different set of circumstances than the national office doling it out to these other large groups. So I wish to make that clear. So Bishop Ricken, the diocese took up the collection, or will take up the collection, but the money that gets collected, I believe he said he's directing a lot of it onto Haiti and then using some of it locally, but it will not go to these groups. So. Now, as we go through and try to understand what's been going on here at the CCHD, Catholic Campaign for Human Development, there's a number of issues they have here. For example, there is the Social Ministry Gathering Conference that was held about a month ago. This Social Ministry Gathering Conference was a gathering of about 400 Catholics from all over the country. This was the weekend that Washington, D.C. got whited out by that blizzard, by the way. Unfortunately, it's an annual event. But the Social Ministry Gathering Conference, this from the group, once again, from the group, Funding Decisions, Catholic Teaching, Abortion, Pro-Life, Bishop's Statement, 1999, and says, we don't engage in these sorts of things, we don't do this, we don't support abortion with our money, etc., invited a number of speakers, as they always do, to this conference. One of the speakers was Father Thomas Reese, who used to be the editor-in-chief of America magazine, and he was bounced out of the position when Benedict was elected because he has held a number of contrary views to church teaching. He favors contraception, for example. Another speaker was a woman by the name of Diana Hayes. Diana Hayes is a professor of systematic theology at Georgetown University. She is an open homosexualist, which means she supports the homosexual agenda. Do not know whether she herself is or not. That isn't the question. But she is an open homosexualist supporting the agenda. She is a frequent speaker at Call to Action conferences. She has come out and published, all of this is on her website, that she is in favor of women's ordination, that she is in favor of same-sex marriage, and that she is an enormous proponent of liberation theology. All of this is on her website, Georgetown University. This is a speaker that the Catholic Campaign for Human Development said, come to our conference and speak, please. Another person who was a speaker at this conference was a fellow by the name of Paul Booth. His name Booth ring a bell? Heather Booth is his wife, who sits on the board of the Center for Community Change. And together, the both of them have been the hosts and sponsors on a number of occasions for the gala dinner for NOW, the National Organization for Women. This bespeaks a problem, a rot, somewhere in these organizations. Where are any of the speakers that are out front in the pro-life movement? Where are all of the non-community organizing people? Where is all of this? When you start walking around a room and you see nothing but the same thing, you have to start saying, hey, what's the problem here? There's none of this over there. And something that is particularly disheartening, in light of all of this going on, that's been going on since last October and November, and all the controversy and stuff coming out in the Catholic press, and to some degree eking up a little bit into the secular press, in the middle of all of this, all these charges and this, and documents being revealed and the whole bit, nobody at the Catholic Campaign for Human Development has issued one denial of any of this. They have not responded at all to the charges. Not one response. This is now going on 4 or 5 months. Not a single peep with regard to the actual charges. There are accusations that you are, character assassination and this is all politically affiliated and blah, 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 which has nothing to do with the matter. Where is the money going? What is the process? Why are these groups getting the money? That's the question. Answer the question. In light of all of that, the Catholic Campaign for Human Development just posted on their website about a week and a half ago, probably about 2 weeks ago now, a Lenten reflection on the Stations of the Cross. This is the Catholic Campaign for Human Development. Go check it out. It's on their website. They take each of the Stations of the Cross and they give a little reflection on it. For example, Station 1, Jesus is condemned to death. And they tie this in to the social justice thing. And they say, many people are condemned in life because of their bad stature and things going wrong in their lives and poverty and etc. And that's true to a degree. I'm not sure about tying it necessarily to the Stations of the Cross. But then they give you some groups that epitomize the struggle and the suffering associated with this particular station of the cross. Station number 2, Jesus receives his cross, they mention a group called OVEC, O-V-E-C, which stands for the Ohio Valley Environmental Coalition. Now you're supposed to reflect on OVEC as you're thinking about Jesus receiving his cross to save us from damnation. That group, OVEC, push the pro-abortion agenda on their website. That's not exactly what I think about when I think about the Stations of the Cross. If you move on to the third station, Jesus falls the first time, they offer you another group to share in the reflection. The reflection is the United Workers Association, a group out of Maryland. This group is pro-same-sex marriage. A third group, this one comes up at the 8th station of the cross, is called Power or People. They keep changing their name, what the P stands for. Power Organized for West Side Renewal. It's a California group associated with the 8th station of the cross. Jesus meets the women of Jerusalem. This group is allied with pro-abortion and pro-same-sex marriage groups. Another group, this one really sort of takes the cake. As if those weren't insulting enough, this group is allied with or associated with, in this Lenten reflection, with the 12th station of the cross. Jesus dies on the cross. It's called the New Mexico Aquia Association. On this webpage, you will find that they support radical feminist pro-abortion theology. And this is the Catholic Campaign for Human Development's suggested reflection as you think about our blessed Lord dying on the cross. Something is rotten with this group. Rotten to the core. Here are a couple of other issues as we begin to wrap up. The United States Conference of Catholic Bishops takes up 13 annual collections. The CCHD collection is one of those collections. Takes up 13 annual collections. Not one of those collections is directly for pro-life money. Not one. Church in Africa, Church in Asia, and I'm not saying those are bad, I'm saying those are fine. Where's the pro-life collection? A couple of groups have come out and started a petition online saying, you know what, sign up, we need to take up a collection for pro-life causes. Good luck getting that through this group. Why is nothing being done with this group? Why is nothing being done with these staffers? Why has this been allowed to go on for 40 years? $280 million this has gone on. This is a political front. This is a group dedicated to pushing a political, sociological, ideological agenda under the banner of Catholic teaching, and it is false. Now, if you want to deny all of that and say that I'm some Republican Party operative, which I am not. What was that founding thing? Remember we went back to that founding resolution, therefore be it resolved to collect money to do what? Crusade against poverty. Remember that? They took up the first collection in 1969, so you go back and you say, okay, well, you give it to 1970, because that's, when the money would kind of get into the system and start trying to have some effect. In 1970, the poverty rate in America was 12.6%. $280 million of Catholic money, and almost 40 years later, U.S. Census Bureau's numbers are, lag about a year and a little bit behind. 12.6% was the poverty rate when the Catholic Campaign for Human Development took off. Now, the poverty rate is 13.2%. The poverty rate has increased in 40 years. So if you don't want to believe any of this, if every single factual piece of information here, and there's a lot more than this, if all of this is wrong, if this is all political operations, if this is all just something to strike back at Obama because there's all these sneaky Republicans invading the Catholic Church and all of this crazy stuff you want to believe, forget all of that and say you have spent $280 million of Catholic money and your programs have failed, according to the United States government. Poverty has increased in the amount of time you've spent over $250 million. Stop spending the money and end this program now. Be right back right after this. Thank you very much to our studio audience here for our premiere taping of the CIA Catholic Investigative Agency. And I'd like to tell everybody at home also thank you. We intend on doing a number of programs like this over the course of the coming months, not just on this topic, but on anything that causes damage to the faith. Like I said at the beginning of the show, we're very saddened by the fact that this is the topic we have to do as our premiere show. But we hope you're able to take this message, learn something from it, take the message out, email this program to as many people as you possibly can. Tell them it takes about an hour, sit and watch it, but you need to know this information. You just need to see what's going on with the faith. This is insidious, it's evil, and it needs to stop. So, from the whole staff at CIA, God bless you, thank you, and we'll see you next time.